It's already that time to take a look at the cards from Surging Sparks. I know many of you were anticipating an Eternal Monday video today. There is not going to be one this week because we do already need to look at the top 10 cards from Surging Sparks and some of the honorable mentions and some of the best arts, all the cool things from our upcoming set. So Eternal Monday will return next week. However, let's take a look at some of these amazing cards that are coming out in this new set. First, as always, we have the art highlights. Art highlights are going to be where we begin our journey for Surging Sparks. We have quite a few awesome cards to see, but for the art highlights, we just kind of narrow it down to the best of the best. Here we have the illustration rares of Kecleon and Braviary, both of which have very interesting but vivid art styles. I really appreciate both these arts. The Kecleon in particular is interesting because there's another version of this card that I really appreciate that we're going to look at in a little bit. But both these arts are just really, really cool, and I'm glad to see them in the set. There's also the special illustration rare version of Hydreigon EX. Hydreigon is not one of my favorite Pokemon, comes from what is definitely my least favorite generation. And this particular image is not the best, but this card is still really, really cool, and I'm glad that it's able to do this Pokemon justice, and I'm super, super excited to see this card in person. Up next, we have a couple of the chase cards for everybody, it seems like. Jasmine's Gaze and Lisia's Appeal. I actually really appreciate both these arts. In fact, I think for both of these cards, I prefer their full arts over their special illustration rares, but I do still appreciate their special illustration rares for what they are. Jasmine, my second favorite gym leader after Erica, so glad to see that. Licia is an extremely popular character in the TCG, and this card art is really quite pretty, so definitely like both of these, but I can't mention the special illustration rares without showing the special illustration rares, so here are those. You see Jasmine stuffing her face with what looks like to be a fairly large sandwich, and then Licia doing a, looks like a contest. Both arts also very pretty. Jasmine's very more slice of lifey, but a very interesting style, certainly something that I would love to have in my collection for Jasmine. And then, because we finally do have a new card from Shinji Kanda, we have to jump in and look at that. Shinji Kanda, for those who are unfamiliar, is my favorite currently working artist in the TCG. Tokia, my actual favorite artist, is no longer doing cards for the TCG, but we're going to look at Shinji Kanda because they're still producing amazing art. And speaking of that Kecleon, we have a new Kecleon. You see that style. I love it so much that Shinji Kanda has that really dark background with it. It almost looks like if you've ever done those things where you like paint over really vibrant colors over black and then like scratch out the parts. That's kind of what it reminds me of in this image. I don't know how to describe that very well. Somebody who's better at art than me can comment what that is in the comments so that people can actually understand what the heck it is I'm talking about. But I think many of you probably kind of get the idea just from the way this art looks. It looks really awesome, and I'm super glad to have another card to add to my Shinji Kanda collection. Up next, we have our honorable mentions. Because we do have images in English here, I'm going to be blitzing through these. Usually we kind of go through them a little bit slower, but we have English images now for these cards, so we're going to kind of go through them quick. Up first, we have Quaquaval. This is our very last honorable mention, if you will, in terms of ranking, but I think this card's still worth noting. This is very similar to Claydol from Great Encounters that had a very powerful Pokemon power. In this case, this is an ability. It's only up to 5 instead of up to 6, and you're only putting 1 card on the bottom of your deck instead of 2. But if we ever get a Quaxwell that's especially good, we can pair it up with this, and the two of them are sure to work together with the Quaquaval EX and really cause some damage. Up next is the Eevee with Boosted Evolution. This card is an honorable mention, mostly because there's nothing that can really take good advantage of it just yet. We are supposed to be getting a set full of Eevees here coming soon, so this card will definitely see some play in the long term. However, the card that was supposed to take advantage of it in this set, Sylveon EX, is a little too little for what it needs to be in order to make this card especially good. We do also have Chen-Pao. I'm making the honorable mention mostly because even though its Snow Sync ability gets rid of a stadium card, we're not in a format where we desperately need something like this in the format. Whereas Pumpkaboo and Marshadow were getting rid of things like Power Plant and Pass to the Peak. We don't really currently have something in the format like those that would make Chen-Pao like a key card. So this is one of those cards that you probably should have. Hold on to it. Definitely make sure you have a copy or two because it will probably be relevant at some point. But at least initially, it's just on an honorable mention. Number 4 here is Slacking EX. This is another card that's probably going to be very good in certain decks or in certain situations, but didn't quite make the top 10 list. Additionally, we have Gastrodon as an honorable mention. It turns off the abilities of Stage 2 Pokemon as long as it's on the bench, and those Stage 2 Pokemon, of course, do have to be benched Stage 2 Pokemon. So this can shut off stuff like Gardevoir and force your opponent to gust Gastrodon up to get their ability back, or otherwise get their Pokemon to the active to use the ability. This is a nicher kind of ability block. It's very, very specific, but I still think it's good enough that it's warranting an honorable mention. Additionally, Milotic, similar situation here. Sparkling Scales does wall off Terra Pokemon, so in very specific situations, namely control decks, this could be very useful to wall out those Terra Pokemon like Dragapult. There's also Magneton. Magneton, maybe not the best way to power up. It's what was supposed to be its big partner in this set, but it's still a very good card in that it can get 3 of any type of energy into play onto a lightning type Pokemon, which can be especially useful for getting Pokemon that have crazy attack costs up and going. And then finally, our last of the honorable mentions is Precious Trolley. This is just a set up your bench card, and it's really, really good for decks that want it. Stuff like Regigigas probably loves this. But again, this is just barely hanging off in the honorable mentions. This would be like the number 11 super good card, just not quite enough to make the top 10. But now it's time to look at the top 10. So what is number 10? Number 10 is Brilliant Blender. Brilliant Blender says search your deck for up to 5 cards and discard them, then shuffle your deck. If you are a newer player to the game, you're probably thinking, why would I ever want this? This doesn't seem that good. This card works primarily with decks that love to live in the discard pile. Decks like Regidrago V-Star find this especially helpful, but there are a number of decks in general that can find this helpful in other formats. Basically, any deck that would take advantage of Battle Compressor in the expanded format really loves this. So I'm thinking decks like United Wings, for example, where they just want to dump a ton of Pokemon in the discard pile, or a ton of whatever in the discard pile, and move forward. In that case, Brilliant Blender might be your guy. At number 9, we have Ceruledge EX. Ceruledge EX has the attack Abyssal Flames, which does 30 plus damage. This attack does 20 more damage for each energy card in your discard pile. Additionally, we have the attack Raging Amethyst for Fire Psychic Metal, which does 280 damage, and then you discard all the energy from Ceruledge. This attack, Abyssal Flames, is actually a lot more powerful than it looks at a glance. We've done some testing among my friends and I, and this is not a bad deck. It's actually pretty potent right out of the gate. Yes, you're going to be running 18, 19 energy most likely in your deck, but all the same, the deck's actually not that bad. Is it a tier 1 deck? Maybe not. I kind of see it in a similar vein as Goldengo, where the deck is functional and can absolutely win, but it's not going to be doing it super consistently, simply because it has that little bit of something that's missing to get it all the way up to the top. At number 8, we have Archaludon EX. It has the ability Assemble Alloy. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, you may attach up to 2 basic metal energy cards from your discard pile to your metal Pokemon in any way you like. This ability by itself is actually really good because it's able to power itself up or get another Archaludon ready to go next turn, depending on when and where you're playing this. And then you have an attack that's not that bad either. Metal Defender for 3 metal energy does 220 damage. During your next turn, this Pokemon has no weakness. So if you're going against Ceruledge, for example, from the same set, you're going to want to be able to shield yourself up against that metal, or that fire weakness rather, as a metal type. You're going to be weak. And fire is not a non-existent type in this game right now. But 220 damage is a little low, so you're going to have to use stuff like the Dusknoir line to potentially boost you up, or just take 2 hits KOs. You do have a decent amount of HP. You can probably survive it through a lot of your opponent's stuff. So, you know, they're gonna have to hit you a couple of times to get you down, just like you're gonna have to hit them a couple of times, which kind of evens it out. But something like a Dusknoir will flip it in your opponent's favor, which is gonna pretty much force you to do the same. Even so, it's a good card. It's just probably going to have to rely on stuff that's going to hurt its consistency. Up next is actually a reprint of Countergain. Countergain was last seen in Sun and Moon Lost Thunder. Countergain says, if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, attacks used by the Pokemon this card's attached to cost colorless less. This card is super, super good. And with Arven in the format, we can find this very easily. This is a tool card. Arven can find it for us. We can throw it on a Pokemon, attach an energy. And if we have a Pokemon that has a colorless in its attack cost and whatever other energy it needs, we can be out and ready to attack in a single turn, which makes counter gain absolutely invaluable. At number 6, we have Terra Orb. Terra Orb basically just says, go through your deck, find a Terra Pokemon, put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck. Super good effect. You're finding your Dragapults, you're finding your Pikachu, whatever you want, you're finding them, as long as they are a Terra Pokemon. There's no need for a discard here, you just get the Pokemon. Super good effect. That's why it's number 6. Speaking of great Terra Pokemon, here's that Pikachu we were just talking about. It has the ability Resolute Heart. It says if this Pokemon has full HP and would be knocked out by damage from an attack, it is not knocked out and its remaining HP becomes 10. Then it has the attack Topaz Bolt for Grass, Lightning, Metal, which does 300 damage. So you're not going to get one shot the majority of the time, right? And you're doing 300 damage. This Pokemon can be powered up with Magneton, which is how we tested it on my YouTube channel here. But you could also power it up in a Lost Box style deck, use this as an attacker in place of something like Roaring Moon, where you have this available to you to do a huge amount of damage and take knockouts that way. At number 4, we have Hydreigon EX. It has the attack Crashing Headbutt for Darkness Colorless, does 200 damage, and then you're discarding the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. The effect is quite good. It's quite good. But don't discount Obsidian. Obsidian for Psychic, Darkness, Metal, and Colorless does 130 damage, and then does 130 damage to 2 of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So if they do not have Manaphy in play, or if their Pokemon are not Terra Pokemon, you're going to be doing 130 damage to 3 of their Pokemon, which can be absolutely devastating for many decks. There was a time when we were testing this for the various videos we've been recording, and at one point, Hydreigon just completely swept all of the crucial Pokemon on its opponent's side all at once because it could just do it, and it did. All it needed was a single attachment of a Neo Upper Energy, and it went to town. Frankly, Hydreigon scares me a little bit, but it's a really fun deck to play. We'll see how competitive it ends up being. I think it's at least mid-tier. Super good deck. Super fun deck at that. Number 3, we have Gravity Mountain. Each stage 2 Pokemon in play, both yours and your opponent's, gets minus 30 HP. This effect is interesting because it's on a stadium card. You don't think of it necessarily as being amazing right out of the gate, but most of the time where you need a damage boost or a damage increase, you're going to need it against stage 2 Pokemon. They're the ones that have the big HP. They're the ones that have the massive numbers that you have to hit. So something like Gravity Mountain can help bring them down to earth, if you will, and make them easier to knock out. They're taking that 330 HP Hydreigon down to a 300 HP Hydreigon. They're taking a 330 HP Charizard down to a 300 HP Charizard, making them much more manageable when you're trying to take your big knockouts. So Gravity Mountain, super good to get. At number 2, we have Koraidon. This is an ancient Pokemon in the set. It has the attack Unrelenting Onslaught. It does 30 plus damage. If one of your other ancient Pokemon use an attack during your last turn, this attack does 150 more damage. And then it has Hammer In for 110. This is very similar to a Zebstrika in the Rapid Strike era, but it was from Chilling Reign, where it did basically the same idea. If one of your Rapid Strike Pokemon had used an attack, you do a whole bunch more damage. This Koraidon works the same way. This works extremely well in an Ancient Box style deck. This attack cost is super easy to power up if you have Sadas in play, or if you have access to Sadas rather. There is just no world where I can see this being a bad card, and I think this is easily one of the best cards in the set. I don't think it's the best card in the set, but it's pretty close. Just that easy 180 damage for Ancient Box to hit makes this quite a scary card. And then finally, at number 1, Latias EX. Latias has the ability Skyliner that says your basic Pokemon in play have no retreat costs. And it means no retreat cost. Even if you have something like Gravity Gemstone in play, the basic Pokemon still have a 0 retreat cost, which makes Latias extremely potent and extremely useful as an ability. So having a copy or 2 of these on hand for you when you're deck building is an absolute must. I've seen decks, even Ancient Box decks in Japan, running this card because it's just so incredibly powerful. And as if that weren't enough, it does have an okay attack here. Eon Blade for 2 Psychic and a Colorless. It does 200 damage. So that free retreat for basic Pokemon, incredibly valuable for decks like Roaring Moon, like Ancient Box, like Raging Bolt. decks can take advantage of this. Even if they don't necessarily want to, they absolutely can take advantage of this. And that's why it's made number one, because it's just the most universally useful card in this entire set. And this set is full of quite a few really good cards. But that is it for today. That is it for Surging Sparks. What is your top 10 from Surging Sparks? What card are you most looking forward to playing with in Surging Sparks? Let me know down in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next one.